Also thanking our corporate partners, NTB, NDB, Sampath Bank, DaCosta, TJ, Brandix, JK Office Automations, Parsilon, Colombo Jewelry Stores, and Abans. Thank you for your commitment and support. As you know, we're looking at a serious challenge and a series of challenges on the environment front. And we're encountering a lot of these challenges, and we need your support, the members and all of you who would support the WNPS. We need to educate, we need to communicate, and we're also looking at legal battles in some instances, and all financial support at this juncture would be most welcome. And donations could be made on our website, WNPSSL.org. Please do get onto our website and support us, and because we've got many challenges that we need to take on as we move forward. To CJ and our team at Salva Advertising for creative support, Dilma and Virtual Tea at Home, thank you for your continued support. We have a new look website. Please do go on and check it out if you haven't already. Thank you to eBeyonds for the website design, development, and hosting. The 125th commemorative issue of the Loris and other publications available for sale at the WNPS head office. The latest copy of the Loris is available online as well for both members and non-members. The latest copy of Varna will be released online this week. We do ask you and request you to pay up your 2020 subscriptions through bank transfers or online payments as soon as possible. That would be greatly appreciated. We invite non-members to join WNPS. Application forms will be available online on our website as well. We need volunteers for most of our subcommittees as the activity levels continue to grow. The Wildcat subcommittee in particular needs volunteers. We also need volunteers on the Marine subcommittee. Please sign up by contacting one of us, just emailing us, or contact us on our website. We would need volunteers. Numbers don't matter, the more the better. Some of the achievements in the society, which I'd like to highlight here. We conducted the first ever virtual AGM, and I'm proud to say it was probably one of the first AGMs conducted island-wide virtually during the crisis. We have many issues that are facing us, as I told you. We have issues where we have challenges on our pristine mangrove reservations, being used for very short-term gains. We have other challenges with cats and with leopards, as you can see, with forests. So there are plenty of challenges, and your support is needed, and knowledge too. Anyone wishing to share support, knowledge, and make donations is most welcome to join us in this journey. Some of the field trips planned, subject to the situation, of course, would be a field trip to Duvalawe, Lunugamwera on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of August. That's what's on the cards at the moment. And we do want plans for our Green Isle project, which you can read more about on your on the website. I do request you to mute all your connections, please, and switch videos off for better connectivity. As most of you have been using Noom, we have a very large crowd on the connection at the moment. So request you to kindly switch your videos off. We'll tell you how to get on for questions at the end of the program. Let me thank Parrotfish Collective for that lovely video. And before I get on to introducing the speaker, let me tell you a little bit about that video. But before that, just a preamble to the subject. See, we are all familiar with the term forest and associate it with whatever we see, probably the dry zone forest, the montane forest, the large trees that we're all used to, the shrub type of forest, which we are generally familiar with and we encounter. But in this classification, there is also a very small but critical part of our forests, which are estimated to occupy about 87,000 hectares of land, which is about 0.5%, actually less than 0.5% of the total value of land mass, called the mangroves, which perform an extremely critical role in maintaining in maintaining various factors, from the economy to our climate, to even protecting our marine and habitats and environments and seashores. That's what Dr. Sevvandi will be talking to us today about. The mangroves, as you know, or you probably know, I'd like to reiterate this fact that they absorb up to 4 times more carbon dioxide per hectare than tropical rainforests. So you can imagine the impact that mangroves play in climate change and in mitigating climate change. These beautiful habitats shield Sri Lanka from cyclones, storm surges, and tsunamis, and and they also filter water. They prevent erosion. Enormous in terms of value. They also provide to the livelihood of lots of coastal communities. There's artisanal fishing going on there. There's even things like firewood. Mangroves are also breeding ground for fish, shrimps, and many other aquatic species. A very, very critical part of our biodiversity and our environment. Just giving you a quick check on Vidaththalaithiv. As you know, it's probably the largest mangrove, occupying about 29,000 hectares of land in Sri Lanka, just above Mana. There is a threat to this beautiful habitat, which is very unique. It is one of the places which holds one of the biggest sightings for water birds. More than 1 million shorebirds have been seen here. It's very unique. In fact, this is the only area in Sri Lanka where mangroves grow on a coastal setting facing the sea. It's also famous for the rare and endangered dugong, which feeds in the extensive seagrasses found in the area. It is indeed a rare and a treasured ecosystem, which I think we all need to get out there and preserve. With that, let me now introduce you to Dr. Sevvandi Jayakody, who is a speaker tonight. Dr. Sevvandi is no stranger to the field. She's probably the most competent authority on mangroves we have in the country at the moment. She's completed a Bachelor of Science Honours degree in Zoology from the University of Kelaniya, from the Postgraduate Diploma in Wildlife Management and Conservation from Wildlife, is also of India, and a PhD in Zoology from the University of Aberdeen, UK. Dr. Jayakody's postdoctoral research was in Australia at the James Hutton Institute in Scotland, and also studies in Scotland and in Canada. Dr. Jayakody started a career at the Department of Wildlife Conservation as an assistant director in 1997 and currently serves as a senior lecturer at the Wayamba University of Sri Lanka. She served as coordinator of CITES, currently serves as the chairperson of the National Mangrove Expert Committee, a member of the Commonwealth Blue Carbon Initiative, a member of the National Environmental Council, and a director of the Environmental Foundation Limited. Her research interests includes coastal ecosystem management, policy and impacts of human disturbance on the ecosystems and processes and functions. Let me now introduce and invite Dr. Sevvandi Jayakody to speak to us on mangroves next up. Welcome, Dr. Sevvandi.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you indeed. And it's a pleasure to speak to you all today. And with a very odd title, Do-O-Don, Their Snow Tribe, Mangroves and Their Future. I'll introduce the title a little later. But let me start with the fact that to a land animal or a plant sees a very hostile environment. High salinity, wave actions, and fluctuating water levels, they all present problems that are rarely experienced by any terrestrial or freshwater habitat animals. Nevertheless, two greatest assemblages of angiosperms or vascular plants, flowering plants, have overcome these hazards and have successfully colonized the sea, and they are mangroves and seagrasses. Today, I'm going to talk about mangroves, and let's look at mangroves. And in order to take you through mangroves, I've sort of like divided the presentation into 3 segments. You can see that. And I would start with the very first one, where we would delve into the taxonomy, ecology of mangroves, as well as their distribution. Well, I agree that mangroves are not everyone's cup of tea. They are muddy, smelly, and buggy, as noticed somewhere even in 325 BC by Greek mariners. So, yet I can see that there's a large number of people here joined with us with the Zoom to know about this muddy, smelly, and buggy environment. Is it really muddy, smelly, and buggy? Let's see. To start with, I would like to make certain terminologies straight, because there are so many words, mangroves, mangles, mangrove ecosystems used interchangeably. But what is mangroves? Mangroves are, whenever you use the word mangroves, it denotes to the woody shrubs and trees that have specially adapted to grow in tropical and subtropical areas in the land-sea interface. So the word mangrove denotes to the plants. Mangles is used when we talk about the forest that is created by these special mangrove plants. Finally, the word mangrove ecosystem is used when we talk about the mangrove plants, the fauna or the animals that are associated with it, as well as the abiotic environment. Here we talk about the tides, here we talk about wind, here we talk about seawater interface, all that. So once you talk about the abiotic environment and the biotic component of it, which includes both plants and animals, then we talk about mangrove ecosystem. So the 3 words here sort of denote 3 different meanings. As I mentioned earlier, mangroves are confined to tropical and subtropical areas. And very clearly, the map shows that the number of species is highest in Indian Ocean, especially around India, as well as around Malaysia, Indonesia, so on and so forth. So we are quite lucky not just to have mangroves, but also to have a very high density and a high species diversity of mangroves in the country. Well, there is also the other word, which is always heard, the word true mangroves. What are true mangroves? True mangroves is used to talk about mangrove plants that are found only in mangrove forests, and they have very special morphological and physiological adaptations to fit into this environment. In other words, you are not going to find these plants anywhere else in any other ecosystems. We also talk about mangrove associates. These are all the other coastal plants that mix with true mangroves and creates the mangrove ecosystem. They change from location to location. Mangrove associates that you see in the wet zone are completely different to the mangrove associates that you see in the dry zone. When we talk about true mangrove species, globally, there's around 55 to 72 species. You know, scientists always love arguments. So there's no real agreement about the real number of true mangrove species. So we say there's around 55 to 72 true mangrove species are present globally. And of that, 21 species are found in Sri Lanka. In other words, 1/3 of the global mangrove diversity is found in Sri Lanka. And that's exactly why Sri Lankan mangroves are quite important and very special. Where the conditions are right, mangroves sometimes create monostands. And these monostands are quite interesting and quite beautiful. Acres and acres of just one species, as you see here in this slide, which is locally known as Manda. Botanical name is Avicennia marina. It's just like a grove of olives, if you have seen it. So from monostands, sometimes with the right conditions, we also get mixed stands. Mixed stands are created when the conditions are just right for the mangrove ecosystem to have many species of true mangroves and associated species. The picture here shows you a mixed stand where you can see really good stand of Rhizopora mucronata, Bruguiera cylindrica, Cereops tagal, and Exocheria glauca. 4 species of true mangroves are seen in this picture, along with other mangrove associates. So when you go into a mangrove ecosystem, you can expect that you can see the mixed stands as well as the monostands of mangroves. And that's a very unique feature that you see in mangrove ecosystems compared to other ecosystems that we study. I mentioned earlier, mangrove ecosystem is not an easy place to live. Constant tidal fluctuations, extreme temperatures, and incoming fresh water laden with sediment creates really hostile environments. So you need very special adaptations to survive in these kind of environments. Let's look at some of the adaptations that we see in mangrove plants. Let's start with the leaves. Now, though mangroves survive in a sea of water, uptake of fresh water is still a big problem because water present in mangrove ecosystems are laden with salt. So plants have got special adaptations to take up the water, but also to get rid of salt. Now, as you see here in this slide, you can see to your left, Avicennia marina or Manda leaf, and you can very clearly see the salt that has formed. And that's the glands that excrete excess salt from the plant. And to my right, you can see beautiful red leaves. These are, again, the leaves of Exocheria aguloca. What it really does is that it absorbs the salt and store the salt in leaves and then later on discard when the leaves are laden with salt. So that's the way that it regulates salt. Salt is one problem, but there are many other problems. What if you have to live in an environment where tides is a constant problem, where sediment load is constantly creating boggy, muddy conditions? You need to stay upright. You have to also remember in mangrove ecosystems, soil is always anaerobic. What is anaerobic? There's less oxygen found in the soil layer. When there's less oxygen in the soil layer, roots have special problems. Where do you find oxygen to breathe? Roots also need to breathe. So in mangrove plants, there are special adaptations for soft saline, low oxygen soils. I've given you several pictures here. They are all special root adaptations, from pneumatopropose to prop and stilt roots that you see in Rhizopora plants, knee roots and ribbon roots. All these roots help mangrove trees to stay upright. Not just to stay upright, but also roots defy gravity and come upward in order to seek more air for the plants. So all these adaptations again help the trees to stay upright and have enough oxygen for them to survive. Mangrove plants produce a grand display of flowering and attract pollinators from far and wide. They bloom during different times of the year, and there are complex pollinator behaviors. We know very little about these plant pollinator behaviors. We are yet to study them. However, we all also know that these complex pollinator flower behaviors have given rise to various fruits. In time, flowers give rise to the fruits, but then the fruits have a big problem. What is the problem? Where is the assurance that a fruit that falls from a tree will not be washed to the sea? Where is the assurance that the fruits will not be carried by the tides? So mangroves have to evolve special techniques to make sure that this grand display of flowers, when at the end, when they pave path to the fruits, that the fruits are also having enough adaptations to ensure that they stay in the right place, that they find the right location to germinate. And that's what you see here. Mangroves, especially the true mangroves, have adopted a very special technique to ensure that their fruit seeds and fruits will germinate and that they will germinate in the right location. Here, I would like to say that there is something common between sharks and some mangrove species. You know, sharks give birth to live young. Mangroves also carry germinated plants or germinated seeds. Some mangrove species are viviparous. What does that mean? That means they retain their seeds even after it is germinated. And these long cylindrical propagules are formed. And when they are matured, the parent trees drop them into the water. And these are known as hypocotyls. The real shape of these hypocotyls enable them to sink into the soft mud and then germinate in the right place. In addition to that, you can see here other fruits and seeds. They are also having special adaptations to float in water so that they will float and find the right location and germinate in the right place. So at the end of this slide, what I really want to say is mangrove plants have created right condition for many animals to come here because this is a place with lots of food and lots of shelter. So mangroves therefore creates mangrove ecosystems. Here in Sri Lanka, mangrove ecosystems are frequently used even by the elephants. Now, this picture, as you can see, shows the elephant trail. This was taken in Vilpattu in Gangewadi area. You can see how elephants seems to be coming to mangrove ecosystems to feed very often. Is it just the elephants or just the mammals that love mangrove ecosystems? No. Mangroves are also the very first stop for migratory birds and also for rare butterflies. As you see here, the short silverline, this picture was taken in Mana. So mammals, birds, invertebrates, what not? I'm very sure Dr. Malik must be listening to this lecture. So Dr. Malik, it's for you to identify the mollusks that I see here, which I have not identified yet. Yet you know from crabs, mollusks, fish and shrimps, all of them find food there, here. And for some animals, this is their breeding place. This is the place for them to raise their young. And we are yet to fully understand the invertebrate diversity associated with Sri Lankan mangroves. Although we know very little about them and their interactions, we know Sri Lankan mangroves have given a place for many vertebrates and invertebrates to perform their daily functions. So, such an important ecosystem. What's the current extent and the distribution of mangroves in the country? You can see the map of mangrove distribution prepared for the 6th National Report that was submitted to Convention on Biological Diversity in 2019. As the map shows in green, mangroves are not found all around the country. They are confined to some very specific areas where only the right conditions are met. That's where they are found. And you can also see, as the map very correctly shows, that we really don't have big, extensive mangrove stands. Our mangrove forests are patchy and limited in distribution. Very few continuous mangrove patches are seen, and that's why it's very important to pay attention to our mangroves at the moment. The extent of mangroves is disputed, but it lies somewhere between 12 to 19,000 hectares. So not a lot of mangroves, not a lot of mangrove ecosystems. Now, another fact that I would like to make very straight here is that although I mentioned at the very beginning that we have 21 true mangrove species, not that they are found throughout the country. Certain species of mangroves have limited range and they have site affinities. So if we look at these 3 species here, Lumnitsella liturea, which is known as Rathamilla in Sinhala. Rathamilla is not found everywhere in the country, but just in one location. In few, it is confined to few islands in Madhuganga. Nowhere in the country we find Lumnitsella liturea in Sri Lanka. Same thing can be said about the species shown in the middle of this slide, Cereops decandra. It's found in Trincomalee and Kinya area only. The species to my right, which is known as Scyphiphora hydrophyllaceae, Kalukadol in Sinhala, or black mangrove in English, is also having a very limited distribution. At the moment, we see it in the northwestern coastal belt of Sri Lanka, confined to Vanathavillu Puttalam area. So, although we have 21 species, they are not found everywhere. That also makes me make the statement that 2 mangrove stands in the country are not the same. In other words, we cannot sacrifice 1 mangrove stand mentioning that it's found elsewhere. They are very different. Their composition, species, diversity, and distribution. So, having got an idea about the taxonomy, ecology, and the distribution of mangroves in the country, why not now we go to the second half of our presentation, where I would like to talk about what are we doing to destroy mangroves. Well, we are doing a lot to destroy our mangroves. That's a sad thing about it. It's basically because for a long time, mangrove ecosystems have been viewed as peaty, boggy, smelly areas, so that there had been no mercy shown towards mangroves when it comes to development. So from land grab to land conversions, human settlement, and even filling of mangrove ecosystems, mangroves have been constantly altered and converted into other landscapes. And that's the sad reality of mangroves in the country. But there are some special cases that worth mentioning here, and let's look at those things now. Coming to land conversions, one industry in particular is quite important. That's salterns. Large chunks of mangroves have been converted into salterns in the country all around the coastal belt, especially in the arid zones of Sri Lanka. And some salterns, once they are abandoned due to various reasons, give rise to landscapes like this. Barren, very hostile landscapes where no animal and plant can survive. And when mangroves are converted into salterns, the life of the ecosystem is taken away. And that gives us special problems when we think about restoring these kinds of landscapes. The second industry is shrimp farming, or I would say aquaculture. Since 1980s, we have been systematically removing mangrove ecosystems in the country, especially in the northwestern coast, as well as in the eastern coast. The sad thing about this thing is that large chunks of mangrove ecosystems and associated ecosystems like salt marshes and other intertidal areas have been converted into shrimp farms. Some are active and some are abandoned, as you can see here in this slide. The problem is that once you convert mangrove ecosystems into shrimp farms, it's very, very difficult, again, like in the case of salterns, to restore such ecosystems. Even if you abandon it, unless there is some intervention, human intervention to revive the mangroves, they can remain as deserted areas for a long, long time. Is it just the industries? No, pollution is another big problem for mangroves, along with the river diversions. River diversions have created two problems. One is either less water influx to mangroves, changing the salinity, or high water influx, changing the salinity and creating low saline conditions, killing mangroves. But coming to pollution, mangrove ecosystems, especially estuarine mangroves, are the last point where all the land-based waste is accumulated. Both solid and liquid waste ends up in mangrove ecosystems. But in recent years, we have another problem, that is illegal camping in river mouths and the pollution associated with these illegal camping. What you see here is a typical scenery. I've taken this photo in Gangevadia. You can see, despite being declared as reserve forest by the Department of Forest, people are happily camping, and you can see at the end of the day the waste that is accumulated in the area, in addition to burning of the plants due to camping. So influx of land-based pollutants are a big problem to mangroves. Very interestingly, these isolated mangrove patches are also excellent hideouts to carry out illegal operations. From producing moonshine to smelting of discarded batteries to get lead, so many illegal industries are operated in and around mangrove ecosystems. The picture that you see here is taken in Puttalam, and you can see how discarded, discarded batteries are smelted here to get lead. And all these pollutants end up in associated lagoons and estuaries. what happens when that amount of pollutants enter into estuaries and lagoons and associated mangrove ecosystems. This is what happens. What you can see here is the extensive pollution leading to algal blooms, or rather creating eutrophic conditions in water. I can remember Dr. Chaturangi identifying the species here, Limbia, and according to her, this particular cyanobacteria produce toxins, which is harmful not just for the aquatic organisms, but also for any animal that comes to drink water from this environment. And that's the sad situation of water associated with mangroves in the country at the moment. Mangrove trees, especially Avicennia marina, Manda, is cut extensively, and illegal logging is done to extract timber, firewood, as well as to take branches for fishing practices such as brush piles, which are operated in mangrove areas. Well, it's not just that. The hotel here, I'm very sure some of you might have even frequented this. It's already done, it's already in operation. This has been built within 1 kilometer boundary of a national park. You know, to construct a hotel within 1 kilometer boundary of a national park, you need to conduct an EIA and you need to get an approval. None of these procedures have been performed, and as such, these kind of operations continue to destroy our mangrove ecosystems. It's not just the development, it's not just the land conversions, even the invasives. This picture was taken at Vidaththalaithiv in Honduras, and you can see two species of invasives here. The canopy is overtaken by a creeper known as Mycania, an invasive, and the bottom layer has been taken over by another species of invasive, Dillenia subfruticosa. What really happens? The canopy is covered and the bottom layer is also covered. And little by little, the true mangrove species die because the light is cut off. So invasives are also a real problem to the mangroves in the country at the moment. Well, sadly, we are not a nation that learns lessons. Even after sacrificing large extents of mangroves, starting from Chilaf to Vidaththalaithiv, and also in the eastern coast, there are still attempts to degazette what is already protected. Graham was earlier talking about Vidaththalaithiv, one of the best mangroves in the country is at the moment under threat because there are attempts to degazette this beautiful, pristine mangrove ecosystem, which is very important to Sri Lanka. I must also mention here that the recent attempts to abolish Not 5 2001 circular may have devastating effects if it comes to operation, because most of our mangrove areas are still other state forest. Well, so this muddy, smelly ecosystem is, why are we continuously harassing it? Is it because it's not important? Is it because we've not identified the services it provides? I'm not going to spend time talking about all the services of mangroves. I think Graham mentioned some of them. Let me use just one factor to convince you that as islanders, for us, mangroves are very important and that we must put all our efforts to protect mangroves. I'm going to use just one fact: carbon. Carbon storage in mangrove ecosystems have been well studied, and we know the amount of carbon that sinks in mangrove ecosystems yearly. And here's some statistics. To convince you, I've got the carbon burial rate in tropical forests and some of the coastal ecosystems. And you can, as you can see very clearly here, mangrove ecosystems have the ability to sink carbon way more than many of the terrestrial ecosystems that are known to us. So as islanders, for us, our future, our security depends on conserving the mangroves. So should we continue to harass our mangroves? And is that the way we need to treat? Well, let me come to the last phase of my presentation now. Although there are a lot of people out there that are ready to convert mangroves into other industries, convert mangroves into other landscapes, we also have a dedicated number of institutions, large number of people that have put their efforts to protect mangroves. And I'm going to talk about the efforts taken by the government of Sri Lanka, the scientists of Sri Lanka, and the nature lovers to protect mangroves. Well, this heavy slide is quite important for two reasons. Because it highlights some of the things Sri Lanka has been doing to date to protect mangroves. We are used to talking about not having progressive thinking to protect our natural resources. But when it comes to mangroves, I think the story is different. I'm very proud to say that government institutions, especially the Ministry of Environment, Department of Forests, Biodiversity, Secretariat of Sri Lanka, Department of Wildlife Conservation, as well as Sri Lanka Navy and Ministry of Foreign Relations have got together to do a lot of things, and many experts, both governmental and non-governmental, and NGOs and general public have been supporting. So let's look at what we have been doing so far. And you can see, we've been thinking about mangroves since 2015. 2015, Sri Lanka established National Expert Committee on Mangroves. And this committee paved the path so that Sri Lanka was selected as the champion for mangrove conservation by Commonwealth Blue Charter in 2017. And then in 2019, National Task Force for the Restoration of Mangrove Ecosystems was established. And very interestingly, in 2019, for the 4th United Nations Environmental Assembly, Sri Lanka, along with Indonesia, proposed a resolution and it was adopted, which was about sustainable management for global health of mangroves. And the work that was done by the National Mangrove Expert Committee since 2015 enabled us to get the national policy for the conservation and sustainable use of mangroves approved by the cabinet in January 2020. So unlike other countries, we now have a policy with strategies and policy statements so we can move forward to protect our mangroves and also to use them sustainably. 2019 has been a grim year for all of us for many reasons. For me, the silver line had been what we've been doing with mangroves in 2019. Two things are very important. Number one, a gazette that enabled us to come up with guidelines for any future release of mangroves for any type of development. And that is now done with wider stakeholder participation, so we can expect justice for mangroves in future. What is more exciting is what happened in 2019. Nowhere in the history of Sri Lanka, we have 54 gazettes being signed by a president on a single day to protect forests. Approximately 17,000 hectares of mangrove forests and other coastal ecosystems were gazetted under Forest Ordinance in 2019. And that included 17,920 hectares of reserve forest, as well as 70 hectares of conservation forests. Gazetting is one thing, managing them and ensuring that we protect them sustainably is another thing. After gazetting, Department of Forest did many things. For an example, 70 hectares of degraded mangrove lands in Mana as well as in eastern coast, in Trincomalee districts were fenced to protect them from cattle grazing and related damages. The photo here is taken in Mana, and you can see how now a fence is standing, encircling the gazetted mangrove areas so that grazing can be minimized. Why grazing is such a problem? This photo speaks. You see in here the same species, Abyssinia marina. The taller trees have fortunately escaped grazing. The shorter trees, the same age, but they are dwarfed and stunted because of extensive grazing. A recent visit done by us, in fact last month, I was so happy to see these dwarf trees coming up with new branches, new flush, and they are doing beautifully just because there's no grazing happening anymore. But life is not easy for a forester. This fence in itself has created several legal conflicts. I know that already there is a human rights case, and that the Forest Department has to tackle that kind of problems while conserving mangroves. We also had to look for new alternatives to revive and restore mangroves. Site assessments were in particular very challenging. We had no guidelines. We had no examples to look at. So we had to do things by ourselves. Training on restoration and making sure scientific data are managed so that these sites are managed at pilot sites were all very important. Site assessments in particular were quite important for two reasons. Number one, we really want to restore mangroves where mangroves should be. We really don't want to go and get rid of a salt marsh, as you can see here, and plant mangroves in a salt marsh mangrove interface, because salt marsh are equally important coastal ecosystems and they should not be touched. Why? Because sometimes salt marshes and mud flats can look like abandoned areas. So you really need to assess the sites. As you can see here, this forest officers assessing sites in Mana to make sure that they have selected the right location to do the restoration and replanting. You also don't want situations like this, where we go and replant in the lagoon. No, lagoon should remain as the lagoon. We cannot go and plant mangroves in lagoon and make sure and sort of get rid of the size of the lagoon or make it smaller, narrower, because channels of water coming from lagoon brings important water and nutrients for the mangroves to survive. So selecting the right location was a challenge, and to date we've been trying different techniques, different approaches to make sure that the right locations are selected. Here I'm quite excited. Earlier, replanting used to be three things: collecting seedlings, managing a nursery, transporting these seedlings to a selected location and planting them. But Department of Forest wanted to do it differently. With the expert advice and the guidance, we started managing mangroves, seedlings in the exact environment where the restoration is going to happen, under the same trees, in the same location, exposing them to the exact conditions where they would be later on growing. That was natural acclimatization of the seedlings to the right conditions. We were worried to start with. We were not sure whether these plants would survive. Can I show you something? The same location now, same location before, same location today. You can see the healthy plants growing happily under the right conditions. And these plants will now be transported, and some have already been done, and they are being used as the material for the restoration. This is the hands of Manjula, a forester from Department of Forest. Why am I showing the hands of Manjula to you? Abyssinia marina seeds are like cashew to crabs. So we really didn't have a method to protect Abyssinia marina seeds from crab predation, and also to make sure that Abyssinia marina seeds will germinate successfully. Manjula went ahead and did a trial. He put seeds into gunny bags and he put them into lagoon so that they will be soaked in lagoon water to get rid of the toxins that prevent germination. And once they were partially germinated, he transferred them to seedling bags, and it's quite successful. And these are the lessons that we are sharing with Commonwealth Blue Charter at the moment, so that the other countries can share our knowledge and our expertise. We are also at the moment getting involved with communities. Coastal communities are supporting the departments to grow mangroves in their backyards, so that two things are happening. It's an income to the coastal communities. Not just that, through this initiative, we are introducing and exposing them to the importance of mangrove ecosystems, so that the communities join with us to protect the natural mangrove stands in their backyard. Planning is a vital component in protecting mangroves. To my left, you see an abandoned shrimp farm. You can see the cement bund, the dike, and also mangrove that has already come up naturally. But you also see the plants that are being managed by Department of Forest. We need to take decisions about the density of plants, how to plant, when to plant. All that is meticulous planning. We really are at the moment in the pilot level, but things are happening in the ground. Data are being collected, and we are seeing some very successful stories. Earlier, the practice was to take plants and go somewhere, select a site, and to plant them. But things are different at the moment. We are conditioning the sites. What you see here is actually an abandoned saltern. In an abandoned saltern, the biggest problem is acid sulfate soil, which does not allow any plant to come. So even before planting, we are at the moment cutting channels, like coconut fronds, channeling water so that the water can condition the soil and create enabling conditions so that when the plants are brought in, they have the right soil and water condition for them to survive. And this is working at the moment. Not just that, These two pictures tell you a very important story. What you see here is pictures taken in Putlam, abandoned shrimp farms. You can see how with the abandonment, even after abandoning the shrimp farms, people come here very often to cut trees um, to take branches to make brush piles and also as firewood. So to come up with plants and to ensure that the plants grow here, it's a lot of communication, a lot of convincing. And you can see with that kind of efforts how mangroves are slowly growing in these areas. What we need now is the support of the communities to protect these things. So at the very end, let me come to the title of my talk. Do or don't, there's no try. Why did I use a phrase given by Yoda? I'm a big fan of Star Wars, a big fan of Yoda. And I think this applies very correctly to Sri Lanka. From one side, at the middle of my lecture, I talked to you about how certain parties of Sri Lanka, even certain government institutions, are trying to destroy our mangroves. Remember, when we try to destroy our mangroves, we are destroying them by hectares. At the same time, I also told you how certain government departments are doing their level best, learning lessons to revive mangroves. But restoration and restoration ecology is new to us. We know very little about it. Mangrove ecosystems are easy to cut, easy to destroy. But reviving happens feet by feet, inch by inch. So just because we have gazetted some new mangrove areas, just because we are restoring abandoned shrimp farms and salterns, that does not mean we have an excuse to destroy what is already present. What is already present is pristine mangrove ecosystems. What is already present is ecosystems that provide lots of direct and indirect services. And these ecosystems should not be touched just because we are reviving mangroves in the country at the moment, just because we are the champion of mangrove ecosystems conservation for the Commonwealth. Sri Lanka needs to take a decision. You want to do it or you don't want to do it. You cannot say we are trying, and that will not take us anywhere. So time has come for us to understand the importance of the mangroves. The time has come for us to get together to protect this ecosystem. I mentioned at the very beginning, these angiosperms, these true mangroves are so important. And they have got these very special adaptations and they have colonized land sea front. We cannot destroy them and have something else. And especially as islanders, remember, you and me can sleep peacefully. We slumber peacefully just because mangroves act as a defense, act as a natural barrier, and protect us from tsunamis, storm surges, so on and so forth, so that we can sleep peacefully. So unlike any other country, for us Sri Lankans, it's our duty and we should be duty bound to protect our mangroves. This presentation was possible because of the work of many people. I need to thank all of them. I need to thank especially the Conservator General of Department of Forest, Mr. Nishantha Edirisinha, Conservator of Forest in particular, and all the staff of Department of Forest involved with mangrove restoration. Continue your good work, guys. You are doing fantastic jobs. really happy to say that. I also need to thank Biodiversity Secretariat, Department of Wildlife Conservation, Ministry of Environment, Sri Lanka Navy, that is doing wonderful job, and also Ministry of Foreign Relations for the support given for mangrove restoration, and also the support given in doing all the mangrove related activities. I also want to thank Mr. Sirivardhana, Ms. Achini Fernando, and Sandun Bandara for the photographs that I used. And last but not least, Zainab, who'd been supporting me in doing this presentation at her beautiful house. Thank you very much.
Open for questions.
Yeah, of course.
You want to just keep the last slide?
Yeah, I can go to the very first slide if you want.
Okay. Doctor, can you hear me?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor, for that very compelling 1 hour and the even more compelling message that you leave with all of us. Do or don't do. Do we or don't we? There's no in between. Thank you for that. Let me get on to the questions. What I'm going to try to do is group a few questions which probably lean in the same direction, which probably would result in the same answer. So, as a softener, Doc, I think there's a question on the sizes of Vidaththalaithiv vis-a-vis the other mangroves. Could you just give us a context into that, Doc?
Okay, I beg your pardon. Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah, there was a couple of questions on the size of the Vidaththalaithiv mangrove vis-a-vis the other mangroves. So could you just give us some insight into that?
What is the largest extent?
Oh, right. Okay. Fine. So I'm glad that some of you want to know about Vidaththalaithiv. Vidaththalaithiv is, when we talk about continuous mangrove stands of this country, I'm talking about mangrove stands of more than 1,000 hectares. We have very few actually. Kalaway estuary mangrove is one, Vidaththalaithiv is the other one. Vidaththalaithiv is important not just because of mangroves. It's important because if you look at the map of Sri Lanka, you will see after Mana, along the coastline, that's the most prominent greenery that you see in the coastline. And this is more or less the breeding point for many marine vertebrates and invertebrates. And this is exactly why really flourishing fishery is happening in that area. We are talking about not just shrimp and crab that is caught for Sri Lankan consumption, but we are also talking about species like Porcinus pelagicus, known as blue swimmer crab, which is bringing extensive foreign income to the country. Vidaththalaithiv mangroves, salt marshes, mudflats, and the associated seagrasses provide the breeding grounds and feeding grounds for all these organisms. Not just that, Vidaththalaithiv is also important strategically because at the moment, Vidaththalaithiv is acting as one of the natural barriers that enables sedimentation of all the sediments that are coming through Cauvery Basin. So that some of the sensitive corals that we find scattered around the area all the way up to Bar Reef is protected because of Vidaththalaithiv. So for me, ensuring that Vidaththalaithiv is protected as it is very important. And there cannot be any question about it because it's already protected and it's already gazetted as a nature reserve by Department of Wildlife Conservation. So Department of Wildlife Conservation has done the right thing, done the right assessment, followed the right procedure, and has given a clear verdict from the data that they've collected, from the reports that they requested. They have very clearly indicated the significance of the biodiversity and the ecosystems, and the services are such it cannot be degazetted. When the department that has the mandate to manage it has given a verdict like that, I don't think any one of us, any other government institution has the right to challenge it or even to think otherwise.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much for the clarification on that. The importance of that, of Vidaththalaithiv again. Another couple of questions which I'm grouping. There is some opinion that, as you were saying, mangroves are smelly and boggy, and general public by itself do not know the actual utility and the importance of mangroves, leave aside the communities by itself. Now, irrespective of how we've been doing a lot of work, but what is your take on that? How much more work is to be done with communities? I know it plays a huge role in the preservation and conservation of mangroves.
Yes, Graham. Now, there are two things that are happening. Actually, good that you asked that question, something that I forgot to mention. Ministry of Environment since 2015 have been conducting an extensive awareness workshop for all the government officials in all the 14 coastal districts of this country. This is because we found that the government officials in the coastal districts, they themselves were not aware about the importance of mangroves, the services that they provide, as well as the legal provisions that are there to protect mangroves. And this set of workshops have been very useful, and we now see coalitions, more dialogue between government agencies when it comes to taking decisions. That's one side of awareness. The other side of awareness is to make sure that we talk to coastal communities. Coastal communities, those who actually use the services of mangroves, are very much aware about what they take out of the mangrove ecosystems. But the general perception about mangroves is, Graham, that it's water, it's an ecosystem with flowing water. You can put anything and it will be washed off. And we are still having the idea that it has the ability to give us substance no matter how much we take. We are yet to understand that there are limiting factors and that certain species can go extinct and will be lost forever. So we really need to touch on those things and to make coastal communities, not just the coastal communities, because the threat is not just from the coastal communities. Large-scale development is happening by people that comes from elsewhere. What we really need is focused awareness, not just to talk about the services, but also perhaps to take them to the system for them to understand that mangroves are in fact very beautiful and that it's rewarding to be in a mangrove ecosystem. I think we all need to be a bit chompy in mangrove ecosystems, and that will make people understand, yes, there's a big ecotourism potential. There's a big potential for us to do other activities, not just conversion of land for other developments. So I agree with you, we need awareness and we need innovative kind of awareness to take these messages.
Thank you, Doctor. As I said, I'm compiling questions by all the people who have asked many questions, and in the interest of time, blocking them into groups, which I think would lead to the same answer. There's another one, Doctor, on something that we all try to understand: the EIAs. How EIAs are sometimes, given. How do private sector organizations really put up these things? Get EIA approvals in areas which actually need or go through the system where they don't go through the EIA process. And even government sector, but more so the private sector organizations like the hotel you mentioned. Where is that process falling short of?
The process is falling short because of two reasons. Let me take two examples to elaborate this. Few years ago, some of us were on an official tour, and we saw in broad daylight sand mining happening in Kalauev estuary. When the Department of Forest went ahead and sort of spoke to the perpetrators, what we found was that they said they have got the permission. They've got the permission from the wrong agencies. They were reluctant to believe that the middle of Kalauev estuary is the boundary of Vilpattu National Park, and in order to do sand mining of that scale, that they need the permission, and an EIA should be conducted, and that the project approving agency, one of the project approving agencies should be Department of Wildlife Conservation. When we looked further into the matter, we also understood, no, not that they didn't know, they knew it very well, because those who did it were well-educated people, well-connected people, those who knew the law of the country, that have held good positions in this country. It's just ignorance, not wanting to do things, thinking that they will never be caught. That's one thing. The second thing is some of the developments are proposed by government itself. And certain government agencies have a notion that it's because between two government that we can bypass EIA procedures and that we can go ahead and do that. And this is the sad situation. Sometimes private sector may go through the procedure and sort of do an EIA and perhaps then start the work. But in recent years, we have encountered a number of instances where certain government agencies want to do developments, not just associated to mangroves, but also in other other very important ecosystems, and wanting to bypass EIA procedure. So that's the reality. And so I would say it's lack of what's the right word? A lack of empathy.
Probably.
I would say lack of empathy, and also not understanding that you have to respect the rules and the procedures of your fellow agencies.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Doctor, there seems to be charters that we have signed. One thing is the Commonwealth Blue Charter on preservation of mangroves. Now we see that on one side and we see the destruction on the other side. How does this balance interplay, Doctor? Signing of the charter, and where does that come into play in all this?
Okay. The problem is all around the world, Graham, not just in Sri Lanka. So in every country, you have the two poles, those who want to destroy and those who want to preserve it. So it's a very subtle balance. So to create that balance, you need to have many things in place. Number one, you need to have a clear policy that states what as a nation we want to achieve in terms of mangrove conservation and sustainable utilization. And it's in place at the moment. It's a matter of now implementing it. Then you need to have the right coordination, right stakeholders in place. And that is also happening because we have the Mangrove Expert Committee, we have the Mangrove Action Group. That's also happening. Then you need to have the right guidelines and the procedures in place. As I mentioned you, now we have the gazetted cabinet approved guidelines that tells exactly how in future a mangrove area should be released for development. And in order to do that, now we have multi-stakeholder participation where the right decision is expected. And you also need communication and awareness. So it's very, very subtle, but I think what is important is from one side, ensuring you have the stick in place so that people will have to follow it. But from the other side, you also need to have the carrot in place. What I meant by that is we have to expose and give everyone the chance to use it sustainably, to get something out of it. So that as a country, we need to make sure that that option is also there. So as the Commonwealth Blue Charter, we are trying both to ensure that the conservation is happening, but also the options for sustainable utilization is exposed. For an example, at the moment, I know Forest Department is giving beehives to communities so that they can keep them in the mangrove forests and collect mangrove honey. Mangrove honey is sought after, very expensive honey in the world. So you really need to create this. So this is how we are actually trying to be the champion in Commonwealth, and we are doing things step by step, and there's a lot to be done.
Thank you, Doctor. Getting on to a more technical question I'm seeing here, I would like to ask Dr. Sevvandi about the potential symbiotic relationship between mangroves and coral reefs. Do we see this in the Sri Lankan coastal mangrove forest?
Well, it's a very interesting question. As I mentioned, the real ecology and the biology of mangroves themselves remains to be studied. And the symbiotic relationships between mangroves and coral reefs, to my knowledge, are very little known to me. I'm sorry to mention that. I know very little about it. But let me tell you something, that is the role played by the mangroves to ensure that we have coral reefs surviving very close to shoreline. Let me take two examples. Let me take one example. Let's take Bar Reef. You know, the river mouth of Kalawaya opens straight into Bar Reef. Yet Bar Reef, the water is crystal clear and the corals need clear water with less sediment for them to grow. Who does that? It's the mangroves. The root system and the trees in mangrove ecosystem ensures that the water is temporarily stopped, or the speed of the flow, velocity of water is slowed down, so that the sediments will get deposited, so that the clear water flows into the coastal area, so that the coral reefs and the polyps are not affected. So though I know very little about any symbiotic relationship, they have very good relationship and good dynamics. The moment you get rid of mangroves, corals will suffer because there will be loads of sediments that will then end up in coral reefs, clogging polyps and killing zooxanthellae.
Thank you, Doctor. Another technical one I'm seeing here. I understand that the health of mangroves which line river mouths such as Gangevadia depend on the balance between salt and fresh water. So therefore, with the rise of sea levels, would there be a threat of such mangroves being overrun by salt water?
Certainly, certainly. Even the example you mentioned there, we see that the river itself, we have three very unique segments. One which is hypersaline, one which is hyposaline. This is where the fresh water gets into the river mouth of Kalawaya. And you know, those of you who have been to Kalawaya, the coastal community of Gangevadia just travels upward north into Vilpattu area, and that's where they get their fresh water. So with the seawater rise, the danger is the influx of seawater into such areas. Seawater is dense and heavy, so normally we have a saltwater tongue that normally salt water travels underneath fresh water. Yet with the rising of the sea level, these dynamics can change. And this is why it's also very important to mention here that you have to do proper EIAs and proper assessments before you dredge river mouths, especially for sand mining.
Thank you, Doctor. There's an interesting one here, which I think we should know, and the role of the mangroves in protection from sea erosion, and more importantly, how it played in the tsunami of 2004, how it actually protected us.
It did really protect us, yes, of course. So if you look at the southern coast, many areas where we saw the least damage was the areas where we had mangroves, where we had undisturbed coral reefs, where we had mangroves. The speed of the wave was slowed down, the wave was broken, and the coastal communities were protected. And that's the turning point for Sri Lanka, and as well as for many Asian countries, to understand the real value of mangroves. Before that, we were actually clearing mangroves for salterns and aquaculture, but that was the turning point.
Okay, Doctor. And aquaculture, again, you mentioned, is again another threat for mangrove destruction. Any comment you'd like to make on that one?
Well, the comment I would like to make there is for all of us to think. Sri Lanka is an island, and it's a very small island, not a big island, 65,000 square kilometers. What kind of development can we allow in our coastal zone? You know, now the countries globally are thinking about vertical and horizontal development. So going to the coastal zone and thinking of clearing mangroves and other intertidal coastal ecosystems for horizontal development, for how long can we afford it? And can we actually do it in the long run is a question. So I think what really needs is, we need aquaculture. It's a fact. We need aquaculture. Yet we need new technology to make sure that it is done with the minimum land. It's done properly so that the least amount of waste is released. It's done in such a way the peripheral ecosystems are protected.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Yeah. Doctor, we have another question here. We announced that in 2015, that we made progress. Actually, we're becoming the first country to protect our mangroves. It's now 2020. And how much progress has been made on that front, Doctor? Have we made progress on that front?
Yes and no. Yes is because, as I mentioned earlier, yes is because we've got new areas that have come to protected area status. Yes, because we are trying new techniques to restore mangroves, not replant, but to restore mangrove ecosystems and abandoned shrimp farms and all that. No, because while we do all that at snail's pace, just because it's not easy, we also are at the same time in the process of clearing mangroves, thinking of developments that will take large chunks of pristine, continuous mangroves away. So I would say, yes, we have made progress. We have stories to share about the progress we've made. But at the same time, I must say no, because the threats are still significant. Threats are still extensive, and threats are everywhere.
Okay. We have probably 5 minutes left, Doctor. I think there's another interesting one area we need to touch on, particularly, say, Vidaththalaithiv. There are lots of other industries like artisanal fishing and families that are living off the mangroves. And these have been traditional and they've been all good practices. They've been living sustainably and in virtually with the ecosystem itself. Would you like to enlighten us on that part of it, Doc? The little economies within the mangrove ecosystems, like fishing and maybe firewood. Is there something you'd like to comment on
Yes. Now, if you look at Vidaththalaithiv and the surrounding area, we have a very thriving coastal fishery, both artisanal as well as modern fishery, especially shrimps and crabs in particular. Crabs especially because Vidaththalaithiv crabs are known world over. I was listening to someone from the area making a presentation very recently at another press conference where he said that the conditions are such crabs and shrimp coming from that area has a particular taste that you get nowhere else in the country. That's very, very true. So at the moment, what we really need to do if we want to make sure that the economy is sustained in the long term for the coastal communities that have been living there even during the war is to make sure that the environment is protected, right gears are given, and that we manage the fisheries correctly. I don't think the answer is converting the land to aquaculture. Why? For one reason. When you convert the land to aquaculture practices, it's not the coastal community or the people that have been living there that is going to get benefit. They will perhaps get employed as washermen or people that will have to throw feed into ponds. That's not going to be helpful for them in the long term because unless the effluents are managed properly, unless the system is managed properly, we have seen not just in Sri Lanka, world over, where aquaculture developments are happening, the surrounding sea is polluted, and that then subsequently kills the ecosystem and all the other economic activities. So what I would say is, let's look for new economic models. We've not used our natural capital. We've not looked for models where we can think of innovative ways of using our mangroves. I'm not just talking about ecotourism here. There are many other things we can do here. I was talking about products from mangrove soap to mangrove honey. There are lots of products that we can introduce, and even we can think of how we can sort of open certain areas for people to cut few branches so that they can continue their traditional brush pile fishing. And these products can be marketed with a special tag. So what is required is scientists, policymakers, and industries, new startup businesses coming and getting into that area, looking for using the natural capital rather than destroying the natural capital.
So is there a mechanism to bring this together, Doctor? Is there
certain things that are happening at the moment, but I would say the real dialogue has not started yet for two obvious reasons, because unfortunately we need few agencies to get together for this. Conservation agencies and conservationists need to be flexible and understand some amount of economy got to be sort of like introduced. And those who come up with that kind of models also need to understand the value of the natural capital. To my knowledge, I don't see that kind of dialogues, productive dialogues happening in the country yet. So I think it's right time we do it rather than just talking about it. Time to act.
Fantastic. Very important point, Doctor. One last question. When mangroves are being restored, there's a certain species pattern that is taken into account when mangrove restores. See that's true, there are so many species in Sri Lanka. Does it differ from place to place? The species pattern in restoration of mangroves is a question that has come up.
Yes, yes. When we restore mangroves, let me explain the procedure followed by the Department of Forest at the moment. Even before we think about the plants that we have to use, we do assessments of the peripheral mangroves so that we understand in areas where the mangroves are still intact, what are the species. So we look at the species richness, we look at the density of the plants, but very importantly, from the lagoon towards the land side, the species assemblages. As I mentioned earlier, mangroves are quite unique. You have from monostands to mixed stands. and you have species that are mixing with the true mangroves. So only after understanding the ecology of distribution and what physio-chemical parameters have enabled them to be there, then only we come up with the planting regimes. For an example, something that is planned for the upcoming Mangrove Day celebration in Pubudugama in Vidaththalaithiv is just that. So there are certain strata where we are going to have just Avicennia marina. There are stands where we are going to have 4 species together, because that's what you see. So yes, the science and the ecology of mangroves are being utilized in designing the restoration schemes.
And Doctor, and I think end of this session, but if there's one powerful thought that you'd like to leave with us all today on mangroves, Doctor, would you like to share that with us?
Yes, I see a comment by Mr. Hettiarachchi, the Secretary of Ministry of Tourism. It's Mr. Siri Hettiarachchi. It's very encouraging to see a Secretary of a ministry listening to a presentation, and thank you very much. And I also can see he has indicated that he's happy to provide support to protect Gangewadi area, protected tourism in that area. This is exactly what we need: partnerships and commitment from the government sector as well as from the public sector. As I always mention, mangroves are so important. We cannot protect it unless we all get together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much for being with us today, and really appreciate the wealth of information that you imparted to us. I really did enjoy it, I'm sure, as much as the community that listened to us today. So thank you very much once again, and thank you to everyone. And we see you next month around the same time. Thank you for being with us, and once again, thank you, Dr. Sevvandi. Thanks and good night. Thank you.